I took my daughter's advice. When she told me to act my age and disappear, I did exactly that. What she didn't know was that disappearing would unleash a power I never knew I had, a power she never bothered to look for, tucked away in the documents she never bothered to read. I'm 71 years old. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell, or at least it was. These days, I go by my maiden name again, the one I haven't used in 47 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. At the moment, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I remember because Tuesdays were always our family dinner nights, a tradition I'd maintained for decades. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my daughter's favorite meal, the same pot roast recipe I'd made for her since she was 5 years old. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and garlic. The table was set with the good china, the plates that had belonged to my mother. My daughter, Jennifer, arrived late. She was always late these days, but I'd learned to keep things warm, to adjust, to be understanding. She was busy, after all. Important job, important life. She barely glanced at the table as she walked in, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp and professional. I waited. I'd gotten good at waiting. When she finally ended her call, she sat down across from me with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her entire world. A world I was beginning to understand that no longer had much room for me in it. We ate in silence for a few minutes. I tried to make conversation, asked about her work, about her husband, about the grandchildren I saw less and less frequently. Her answers were clipped, distracted. She checked her phone between bites. Then she set down her fork and looked at me with those eyes I'd once thought were so much like mine. Cold now, calculating. She said we needed to talk about my living situation. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I asked what she meant. She explained in that calm, reasonable tone people use when they've rehearsed something unpleasant that this arrangement wasn't sustainable anymore. I was taking up space in the house that could be better used. Her children were getting older. They needed their own rooms, proper rooms, not the cramped quarters they had now. And I was, she said delicately, getting to an age where I needed to think about the future. I reminded her that this was my house. My late husband and I had bought it in 1978. Every mortgage payment had come from our account, our labor, our sacrifice. When he died 6 years ago, it became mine alone. She smiled then. Not a kind smile, a patient smile, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand something obvious. That's when she said the words I'll never forget. She told me I needed to act my age and disappear. Not in those exact words at first. She was careful, tactical. She talked about retirement communities, about how wonderful they were, how social, how I'd have so many friends my own age, how I wouldn't be a burden anymore. Burden. The word hung in the air like smoke. I asked if I'd been a burden. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she talked about the reality of modern life, how expensive children were, how stretched they were financially, how they were trying to build something, and my presence was, well, complicating things. I sat very still. I'd learned over the years that stillness can be a kind of armor. Then she said it clearly, the thing she'd been dancing around. She wanted me to sign the house over to her. For tax purposes, she explained. For estate planning. It made sense, didn't it? She was my only child. She'd inherit it eventually anyway. Why not make it easier for everyone involved? And then I should think about moving somewhere more appropriate. Somewhere designed for people my age. Somewhere I could, and these were her words exactly, act my age and disappear into a community where I belonged. I looked at my daughter, at the face I'd loved since the moment I first held her, and I saw a stranger who was trying to erase me while I was still breathing. I told her I'd think about it. She seemed satisfied with that. She finished her meal, checked her phone one more time, and left. She didn't help with the dishes. She didn't hug me goodbye. She just left me standing in the kitchen of my own home, feeling like a ghost who'd overstayed her welcome in the world of the living. But I wasn't thinking about disappearing. Not in the way she meant. I was thinking about something else entirely. Let me tell you about the life I'd built before that Tuesday in March. Let me tell you what I sacrificed, what I gave, what I believed I was building. I met my husband, Richard, when I was 23 years old. I was working as a secretary at an insurance firm. He was a claims adjuster, serious and kind, with hands that were always gentle. We married within a year. I was 24 when we bought our first house, a small 2-bedroom in a neighborhood that was just starting to develop. I was 26 when Jennifer was born. I gave up my career without hesitation. That's what women did then. You chose, and I chose my family. I poured everything into being the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Every meal cooked from scratch, every school event attended, every soccer practice, piano recital, parent-teacher conference. I was there, always there. Richard worked long hours, building his career in insurance. He was good at it, meticulous and honest. He climbed slowly but steadily through the company ranks. We were comfortable, not wealthy, but secure. We saved, we planned. We built a life. Jennifer was a difficult child, demanding, particular, prone to tantrums when things didn't go her way. But I told myself she was just spirited, creative, that she'd grow into someone remarkable. I made excuses for her sharp tongue, her casual cruelties, her inability to see past her own needs. When she was 16, she told me she hated me. We'd had an argument about a party, something minor, something I can barely remember now. But I remember her face when she screamed that I was suffocating her, that I was pathetic, that she couldn't wait to get away from me. Richard sat her down that night and explained, quietly but firmly, that she would apologize. She did eventually, though the apology felt hollow. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion. I told myself she'd understand when she was older, when she had children of her own. She went to college on the other side of the country. She called rarely. She came home for holidays but always seemed eager to leave. When she graduated, she stayed out west, got a job in marketing, married a man I'd met exactly twice before the wedding. I flew out for her wedding. Richard was already sick by then, though we didn't know how sick yet. He looked pale in the wedding photos. Jennifer barely noticed. She was radiant, beautiful, glowing with that particular joy of a bride who believes she's found her forever. We came home. 6 months later, Richard was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Jennifer didn't visit until the very end. She was busy, she explained. Work was demanding. Her husband couldn't get time off. She'd try to come soon, she promised. She arrived 3 days before he died. She stayed for 2 days, made phone calls in the hallway, seemed uncomfortable around the medical equipment, the smell of illness, the reality of death. The night before Richard passed, he was lucid for a few hours. He held my hand and told me he was sorry. Sorry for leaving me. Sorry he couldn't protect me longer. He made me promise I'd be okay, that I'd take care of myself. I promised him I would. He died on a Sunday morning in October. With me holding his hand and Jennifer downstairs making coffee she'd probably rather have gotten from Starbucks. After the funeral, Jennifer stayed for 3 days. She helped me go through some of his things, though I could tell it made her uncomfortable. She kept checking her phone. On the 3rd day, she sat me down and said we needed to talk about my future. She suggested I sell the house. Move into something smaller, an apartment maybe, or even better, one of those nice retirement communities. I was only 65. I had years ahead of me. Wouldn't it be easier to downsize now rather than later? I told her no. The house held 40 years of memories. Richard and I had built our life there. I wasn't ready to leave it. She looked disappointed but didn't push. Not then, she left, promising to visit soon. 6 months passed before I saw her again. Those 6 months were the loneliest of my life. I learned what grief really means. Not the acute pain of loss, but the chronic ache of absence. Every morning I woke up and reached for Richard out of habit. Every evening I set the table for two before remembering. Every night I lay in bed and felt the emptiness beside me like a physical presence. Jennifer called occasionally. Brief calls, distracted. She was pregnant, she told me during one of them. I was going to be a grandmother. I cried when I hung up, tears of joy mixed with a sadness I couldn't quite name. She had a son first, then a daughter. Beautiful children. I flew out to meet them, held them, fell in love with them instantly. But Jennifer was different as a mother than I'd been. Efficient, organized, almost clinical. The children had schedules, routines, rules. When I tried to offer advice, she'd give me that patient smile and tell me things were different now, that parenting had evolved. I bit my tongue. I helped when I could. I sent gifts, cards, money for birthdays and holidays. Then, 3 years after Richard died, Jennifer's husband got transferred. Back to our city. Back home, I thought with joy. She called to tell me they were moving. They'd be house hunting, she said, but the market was brutal. Everything was so expensive. They might have to rent for a while, save up, I suggested, tentatively, that they could stay with me temporarily, just until they found something. The house had 4 bedrooms, plenty of space. She hesitated, then said yes, but just for a few months. They moved in that September. My grandchildren were 6 and 4. I told myself this was a gift, a chance to finally be the grandmother I'd always wanted to be. The first few months were wonderful. I cooked breakfast for the children before school. I helped with homework. I read bedtime stories. Jennifer seemed grateful, or at least appreciative. She was busy with her new job, her husband was traveling constantly, and I was happy to help. But slowly, things began to change. Jennifer started making comments about how I did things. The meals I cooked were too heavy. The stories I read weren't educational enough. I was spoiling the children with too much attention. I needed to let them be more independent. I adjusted. I tried to do things her way. The months turned into a year, then 2. They weren't looking for houses anymore, at least not that I could tell. Jennifer's car sat in my driveway like it belonged there. Her mail came to my address. Their furniture filled my basement. I didn't complain. I told myself I was lucky to have them close, lucky to see my grandchildren every day, but I was becoming invisible in my own home. Jennifer rearranged my kitchen to be more efficient. She replaced my old couch with one that matched her aesthetic better. She painted my guest room without asking because the color was dated. When I protested gently, she told me I was being inflexible. I needed to understand that families evolved, that homes were meant to be living spaces, not museums. My grandchildren started calling me by my first name instead of Grandma. Jennifer said it was more modern, less formal, that she wanted them to see me as a person, not just a role. I felt myself shrinking, taking up less space, speaking less, existing less. And then came the dinner conversations, the ones where Jennifer and her husband would discuss their future as if I weren't sitting right there. They talked about renovating the kitchen, adding a pool, expanding the master bedroom, their plans for my house, spoken casually over meals I'd prepared in my own kitchen. I stopped correcting them when they called it their house. It seemed easier that way. 3 years passed. I was 70 years old, and I'd become a ghost in my own life. That's when the real descent began. It started with small humiliations. Jennifer began inviting her friends over without telling me. I'd come downstairs in my robe to find her hosting a book club in my living room. She'd introduce me quickly, almost apologetically, then suggest I might be more comfortable upstairs. She rearranged the garage so her husband could set up a home gym, moving my gardening supplies to a corner where I could barely reach them. When I mentioned it, she said I didn't garden much anyway, did I? Wouldn't it be better to give the space to someone who'd actually use it? She started having groceries delivered, specific brands and items, and told me it would be easier if I just ate what they ate. My preferences, my dietary habits developed over 7 decades, were inconvenient. The grandchildren stopped spending time with me. Jennifer said they needed structure, activities, that sitting with me watching old movies wasn't stimulating enough for their development. I should understand, she said. I should want what was best for them. My friends started asking why they never saw me anymore. Jennifer had made it clear, politely but firmly, that she preferred advance notice for visitors. It disrupted the children's routine. It made the house feel chaotic. I stopped inviting people over. It was easier than dealing with Jennifer's disapproval. I tried to talk to her about it once. I chose my words carefully, tried to be gentle. I told her I felt like I was losing my place in my own home. I asked if we could find a better balance. She looked at me with something like pity and said I was being dramatic. She was grateful for everything I'd done, she said. But I needed to understand that this was the reality of multi-generational living. Compromise, flexibility. I couldn't expect everything to revolve around me. I apologized. I don't know why I apologized, but I did. Things got worse. Jennifer started openly discussing my age, my limitations, my future in front of me like I wasn't there. She'd talked to her husband about how much longer I could really manage the stairs, whether I should still be driving, if we needed to start thinking about long-term care options. I was 71 years old. I walked 3 miles every morning. I had no health problems beyond some mild arthritis. But in Jennifer's narrative, I was already declining, already failing, already becoming a burden too heavy to carry. She started inviting real estate agents to look at the house. She'd schedule viewings without telling me, then act surprised when I was uncomfortable with strangers walking through my bedroom. She was just exploring options, she explained. Just being prudent. Surely I understood the importance of planning ahead. Her husband started making comments about the property value, how much the house was worth now compared to when we bought it, what they could do with that kind of money, how it would set them up for life. They spoke about it casually, over dinner, while I sat across from them picking at food I had no appetite for. I realized they were waiting for me to die or become incapacitated, or simply give up and hand over the keys to my own life. That's when Jennifer arranged the family meeting that would change everything. It was the Tuesday night I mentioned earlier. The pot roast dinner. But before the dinner that afternoon, something happened that I haven't told you about yet. I'd gone to the bank to deposit a check from my pension. It was a routine visit, something I'd done 100 times. But the teller, a young woman I'd never seen before, looked at my account and smiled. She said she wanted to congratulate me. I was confused. Congratulate me for what? She lowered her voice, glanced around, then said the insurance policy payout had been processed. Such a substantial amount, she said. I must be so relieved to have that security. I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her to explain. She looked confused, then concerned. She pulled up my account on her screen, turned it so I could see, and showed me a deposit that had been made 3 months earlier. $1.5 million. I stared at the number. I couldn't breathe. The teller asked if I was all right. I nodded, my mind racing. Then I asked her where the money had come from. She checked the details. It was from a life insurance policy, Richard's life insurance policy. I'd known about Richard's life insurance. We'd taken out a modest policy when Jennifer was born, something like $50,000. It had paid out when he died, and I'd used it to cover funeral expenses and pay off some bills. But this was different. This was something else entirely. I asked the teller if she could print out the details. She did, and I sat in the bank lobby reading the documents with shaking hands. It was a whole life insurance policy that Richard had taken out 25 years ago. A policy I'd never known about. The death benefit was $1.5 million. The beneficiary was me, and due to some clause about delayed discovery and compound interest, the payout had only recently been processed. There was a letter attached to the file, written in Richard's handwriting. The bank had sent it to my house 3 months ago, but I'd never seen it. Jennifer must have collected the mail that day. I asked the teller if she could find a copy of the letter. She made some calls, did some searching, and finally managed to retrieve it from their records. I sat in that bank lobby and read my dead husband's words. He'd written the letter 5 months before his diagnosis, updating his insurance information. In it, he explained that he'd been setting aside money for years, building this policy, protecting me. He'd kept it separate from our regular accounts because he wanted it to be a surprise, a safety net I'd discover when I needed it most. He'd written that he knew our daughter. He loved her, but he knew her. He'd watched her become someone focused on success, on material things, on herself. He worried about what would happen to me after he was gone. He worried that Jennifer would see me as a burden rather than a mother, so he'd built this protection. This secret fortress of financial security that would ensure I'd never be dependent on anyone, never be vulnerable, never be powerless. The letter ended with his familiar handwriting. "Be strong, my love. You are worth more than you know." I sat in that bank for an hour crying silently, while other customers moved around me like water around a stone. Then I went home and cooked pot roast for the daughter who'd been hiding the letter that would have changed everything. That night, when Jennifer told me to act my age and disappear, I understood something fundamental. She'd known about the insurance policy. She'd intercepted the letter. She'd watched me struggle with feeling powerless and poor, had pushed me toward giving up my house, had treated me like a burden who needed to be managed and eventually discarded, and she'd done it. Knowing I had $1.5 million sitting in an account I didn't know existed, I told her I'd think about her suggestions. I let her leave, believing she'd won, believing I was broken and compliant and ready to fade away. But I wasn't thinking about disappearing in the way she imagined. I was planning something entirely different. The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, I called the bank and confirmed every detail of the insurance policy. I had them send me copies of everything, all the documentation, all the correspondence. I learned that Jennifer had signed for the letter when it arrived, had accepted it on my behalf, and then buried it. Then I called a lawyer. Not the family lawyer Jennifer had suggested I use for estate planning. A different lawyer, one who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. His name was Marcus Chen. He was 45 years old, with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. When I told him my story, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me a question. What did I want? I thought about it. I could have said I wanted justice or revenge, or for Jennifer to understand what she'd done. But that wasn't quite right. What I wanted was freedom. Real freedom. The freedom to exist on my own terms, to disappear from a life where I'd become invisible anyway, and to reappear somewhere else as someone new. Someone who owed nothing to anyone. Someone who couldn't be found, manipulated, or discarded. I told Marcus I wanted to disappear completely. Legally, financially, physically. I wanted to vanish so thoroughly that when Jennifer finally realized what she'd lost, there would be no way to find me, no way to undo what I'd done. Marcus smiled. He said he could help with that. Over the next 3 months, I became a ghost in the most literal sense. Marcus helped me establish a new legal identity. Not fake, but revived. I reclaimed my maiden name, Margaret Elizabeth Brennan, the name I'd stopped using when I married Richard 47 years ago. I filed all the proper paperwork, got new identification, new social security card under my original number, knew everything. I opened new bank accounts in my maiden name. I transferred the insurance money in careful increments, nothing large enough to trigger automatic reports, spread across multiple banks in different states. I hired a private investigator to document everything Jennifer had done. Every intercepted piece of mail, every conversation about the house, every instance of her discussing my property and money as if it were already hers. The PI was thorough, and what he found was damning. I contacted a real estate attorney and set up a trust. The house would go into the trust upon my legal death. But the trust beneficiary wasn't Jennifer. It was a charitable organization that provided housing for displaced elderly women. Women who'd been pushed out of their homes by ungrateful families. Women like me, except without the safety net I'd been lucky enough to have. I changed the beneficiary on the life insurance policy from Jennifer to the same charity. All of it, every penny of the $1.5 million she'd been counting on inheriting. I found a small town in Montana, a place where nobody knew me, where I could start over. I bought a modest house there, paid in cash through the trust, under my maiden name. I arranged for everything to be ready, furnished, stocked, waiting. And then I planned my funeral. I need to be clear about this. I didn't fake my death in any illegal way. I didn't file a fraudulent death certificate or collect life insurance under false pretenses. What I did was more subtle, more devastating. I stopped taking my blood pressure medication, not enough to actually hurt me, but enough to make me appear frail, weak, declining. I started having Marcus send Jennifer official-looking letters about my deteriorating health, my need for immediate care, the urgency of the situation. I watched her response. She didn't call. She didn't visit. She sent a text saying she was sorry to hear I wasn't doing well, that she'd try to visit soon, that I should really consider that retirement community she'd mentioned. I waited 2 more weeks. Then I had Marcus send her a final letter. It was written in formal legal language, cold and precise. It informed her that Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell had passed away peacefully in her sleep, that there would be a small private funeral, that her presence would be appreciated. The date of the funeral was set for a Saturday morning, 3 weeks from the date of the letter. I spent those 3 weeks saying goodbye to the life I'd known. I packed up the things that mattered to me. Photos of Richard, my mother's china, a few books, some jewelry. Everything else I left. The furniture Jennifer had chosen. The kitchen she'd reorganized. The life she'd tried to erase me from. I visited Richard's grave one last time. I sat there for hours telling him everything. About the insurance policy. About Jennifer. About what I was going to do. I told him I hoped he'd understand. I told him I loved him. I told him I was finally going to be strong, the way he'd asked me to be. The night before the funeral, I left my house for the last time. I drove away in a car I'd bought under my maiden name, heading toward Montana. Toward a life where nobody knew me as anyone's mother, anyone's burden, anyone's disappointment. I left behind a letter for Jennifer, not in the house, but with Marcus, to be delivered after the funeral. In it, I explained everything. The insurance policy she'd hidden, the trust she'd never inherit, the charity that would benefit from her greed, and the simple fact that Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell was dead, but Margaret Elizabeth Brennan was very much alive, somewhere she'd never find me. The funeral, I later learned, was exactly what I'd imagined. Marcus had arranged everything beautifully. There was a closed casket, which he explained contained my remains and would be cremated immediately after the service, per my wishes. There were flowers, a minister who gave a generic but touching eulogy, and a handful of people from a local church I'd attended a few times who barely knew me. Jennifer came. She wore black, appropriate, but not expensive. She didn't cry, at least not according to Marcus, who attended and took notes. She seemed distracted, checking her phone, looking around as if wondering when it would be over. After the service, Marcus approached her with the letter I'd written. She read it standing in the cemetery parking lot. Marcus told me later that her face went white, then red, then purple. She started yelling, demanding to know where I was, insisting this was some kind of mistake or joke or fraud. She threatened to call the police, to sue, to do whatever it took to find me and reclaim what was rightfully hers. Marcus calmly informed her that everything had been done legally. Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell was dead, her estate settled, her wishes executed. The house was now the property of a charitable trust. The insurance policy had been paid to its designated beneficiary. There was nothing to contest, nothing to claim, nothing to inherit. She asked about me, about Margaret Brennan, demanded to know if that was where I'd gone, who I'd become. Marcus told her that client confidentiality prevented him from disclosing any information about his other clients. He suggested she move on with her life, as I had clearly moved on with mine. She tried to file reports with the police, claiming I'd been coerced or was being taken advantage of by an elder abuse scheme. But the investigations went nowhere. I'd left behind a clear paper trail, documented decisions, psychiatric evaluations confirming my competence. There was nothing suspicious except a mother who'd decided she'd had enough. She tried to contest the will, the trust, the insurance policy. She hired lawyers, but there was nothing to contest. Everything had been done properly, legally, irreversibly. She tried to find me. She hired private investigators, searched public records, posted on social media, asking if anyone had seen an elderly woman matching my description. But Margaret Brennan had no social media. Margaret Brennan had no connections to Jennifer's world. Margaret Brennan was a ghost who'd learned to stay invisible when it mattered. 6 months later, Jennifer lost the house. The trust took possession, and she was given 30 days to vacate. She and her family moved into a rental apartment, something small and expensive, their savings depleted by legal fees chasing a mother who couldn't be found. I know all this because Marcus sends me updates. Brief, factual, professional. I'd told him I didn't want to know, but he insisted I should be aware of anything that might affect my security. So I read his emails, and I learned about the life I left behind. Jennifer tried to sell her story to the press, painting herself as a victim of an unstable elderly woman who'd abandoned her family. But the journalists who investigated found the letters she'd written about retirement communities, the real estate agents she'd brought to my house, the intercepted insurance letter. They found the truth, and the story they wrote wasn't the one she'd wanted them to tell. The charity that received the house and the insurance money did beautiful work with it. They renovated my old home and turned it into a shelter for elderly women escaping financial exploitation. They established a fund in Richard's name to help other women like me gain the legal and financial support they needed to reclaim their independence. I received a letter from the charity's director. She told me that 17 women had been helped so far. 17 women who'd been told to disappear, who'd been treated as burdens, who'd been erased by their own families. 17 women who now had a safe place to rebuild their lives. I cried when I read that letter. Not tears of sadness, but something else, something like peace. As for me, I live in Montana now, in a small town where nobody knows my story. I go by Maggie, a nickname I haven't used since I was young. I have a small house with a garden where I grow vegetables I actually choose myself. I have friends who know me as Maggie Brennan, a widow who moved here for a fresh start, and that's enough. I take art classes at the community center. I volunteer at the library. I have coffee every Thursday with a group of women who make me laugh. I exist on my own terms, visible to the people I choose to be visible to, invisible to everyone else. I think about Jennifer sometimes. I wonder if she understands yet what she lost. Not the money, though I'm sure that stings, but the mother she could have had, the relationship we could have built, the love that could have sustained us both, if she'd only been willing to see me as human. I wonder if she tells her children about me, or if I've become a story she'd rather forget. A cautionary tale, perhaps, or just an embarrassment she doesn't speak about. I don't hate her. That might surprise you, but it's true. Hate requires a kind of energy I don't have anymore, a connection I've deliberately severed. What I feel instead is something closer to sadness for what never was and never could be. But I don't regret what I did. People my age, we're supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity our children allow us. We're supposed to shrink, accommodate, disappear when we're told to. We're supposed to accept that our purpose has ended, that our worth has expired, that we should be grateful just to be tolerated. I refuse that narrative. I chose myself. I chose freedom over family obligation, solitude over humiliation, invisibility on my own terms rather than invisibility imposed on me. It's been almost 2 years now since I left. 2 years since Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell died and Margaret Elizabeth Brennan came back to life. 2 years of learning who I am when I'm not defined by who I am to someone else. Last week I received a certified letter. It was from Jennifer's lawyer, one final attempt to locate me, to convince me to reveal myself and undo what I'd done. The letter was forwarded through so many legal channels that it took months to reach me. By the time I opened it, the words inside felt like echoes from a life I no longer inhabited. The letter begged me to reconsider. It claimed Jennifer had learned from her mistakes, that she understood now what she'd done wrong, that she wanted a chance to make things right. It promised that if I'd just come back, just reveal where I was, things would be different. I read the letter twice. Then I put it through my shredder and used the strips as kindling for my fireplace. Because here's what I've learned in my 71 years. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging. And some disappearances are permanent, not because of anger, but because of self-preservation. I acted my age and disappeared, just like Jennifer told me to. But I did it on my terms, in my way, with my power. And in the end, that made all the difference.